All right, so today we're looking into some material on President Trump. And let's just say it paints a picture of a move. Well, a move with the potential to really shake things up on a global scale, really.
It's a situation that, well, yeah, it really highlights that reputation, Trump's reputation for unpredictability.
Absolutely. We're talking about a proposal that, on the surface, seems to kind of defy all expectations, essentially. Trump is suggesting the United States take control of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, not just like a temporary intervention or something. He's talking about a plan for a long-term U.S. ownership and administration of the entire region.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. What exactly does Trump envision happening in this scenario?
Well, he's outlined a three-phase approach. So first, the U.S. military would move in to secure Gaza, remove existing weapons, demolish damaged structures, that sort of thing. Then the 2 million Palestinian residents would be relocated. And finally, the U.S. would essentially assume control, potentially overseeing redevelopment and taking on the administration of the whole thing.
So it's a pretty radical proposition. And from what I'm gathering, it's not exactly one that's being welcomed by the international community.
You're right. You're picking up on a crucial point there. Trump claims that. This plan, he says, has the backing of many world leaders. But the sources you've shared, well, they paint a very different picture.
Yeah. For example, Saudi Arabia, obviously a key player in the region, seems to be sticking to their support for a two-state solution, meaning an independent Palestinian state existing alongside Israel.
Right. Precisely. And that directly contradicts this whole idea of the U.S. taking over Gaza, and then you've got Egypt and Jordan, both have firmly rejected any talk of resettling Palestinians.
Within their own borders.
So from what we're seeing, Trump is facing pushback from some pretty significant players in the Middle East. Am I understanding this correctly? Even Israeli settlers, who, you'd think, might seem like natural allies in this scenario. They're not exactly on board either. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The sources suggest that Israeli settlers, driven by their religious nationalist beliefs, are actually far more likely to envision resettlement happening on their own terms rather than handing control to, say, American developers to build luxury hotels and things, which is kind of what Trump seems to imagine.
We're already seeing a disconnect between Trump's vision and, and the realities on the ground. But beyond just the political maneuvering, the sources also talk about some pretty potentially devastating consequences of this whole plan.
Right, and this is where things start to get particularly concerning. We're talking about the forced displacement of 2 million people, which, it raises serious concerns about ethnic cleansing.
Well, hold on. Ethnic cleansing, that's a very loaded term. What exactly are the sources saying?
Okay, so under international law, ethnic cleansing is defined as the forced removal of a specific ethnic or religious group from a certain area. But you consider the scale and the nature of the displacement that Trump is actually proposing, it's hard not to.
Yeah, well, to draw parallels. So essentially, by forcibly relocating the Palestinian population from Gaza, Trump could be opening himself up to, accusations of ethnic cleansing, which could have serious legal ramifications on the international stage.
Precisely. And the sources highlight a historical precedent, which might be worth thinking about here. Think back to the Balkan Wars. In the 1990s, that's when the term ethnic cleansing became widely used to describe the atrocities committed in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And eventually, the international community intervened, leading to war crimes trials and even convictions.
So this isn't just theoretical. History shows us that actions like these can have
very real
and devastating consequences. And on top of all that, the sources also point out the potential for significant casualties during the initial takeover of Gaza.
Right. The sources suggest that American military involvement in securing Gaza could lead to a considerable loss of life, both American and Palestinian. It's a grim prospect and one that can't be ignored.
And what about the possibility of Palestinian resistance? Groups like Hamas aren't exactly known for backing down from a fight.
You raise a crucial point. The sources indicate that Palestinian resistance, particularly from organized groups like Hamas, could escalate dramatically in response to Trump's actions. They view this as a direct threat to their control and influence in Gaza, and they've already demonstrated a willingness to use violence to defend their interests.
So instead of stability, this move could actually ignite a much larger conflict. And it's not just the immediate security risks either. The sources also highlight the potential for this plan to severely damage U.S. relations with key allies in the region.
That's right. We've already touched on Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan's opposition to the plan. Alienating these countries could have far-reaching consequences for American influence and stability in the whole Middle East.
Wouldn't this also jeopardize the Abraham Accords, which were considered a major foreign policy achievement for Trump during his first term?
Absolutely. The Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, were seen as a significant breakthrough in the region. But this move, with its potential to destabilize the whole area, could completely unravel that progress.
And speaking of unraveling progress, the sources also suggest that this whole situation it actually play right into the hands of Iran.
Indeed, Iran has long sought to expand its influence in the region. They often position themselves as a champion of the Palestinian cause and U.S. involvement in Gaza, especially if it leads to increased violence and instability. Well, it could create a vacuum that Iran would be all too eager to fill.
So, from a geopolitical standpoint, this seems like, well, an incredibly risky gamble on Trump's part. I mean, he campaigned on reducing foreign intervention, and now he's proposing one of the most drastic and potentially destabilizing interventions in recent history. It's a real head-scratcher.
It certainly is, and it makes you wonder, what's the end game here? Is this a calculated move with some hidden strategic brilliance that we're not seeing, or is it something else entirely?
Well, that's a question we're going to have to explore further. But first,
let's look deeper into the historical context of this whole situation, particularly the Palestinian experience of the Nakba.
Yeah, that's a crucial element that can't be overlooked. The Nakba, which refers to the displacement and dispossession of Palestinians during the establishment of Israel in 1948 it's a deeply traumatic event that continues to shape Palestinian identity and their view of the conflict.
And I imagine that forcibly relocating them again, even if it's presented as a move towards peace, would be seen as a continuation of that historical injustice.
Exactly. It would reopen old wounds, deepen existing resentments, and make any hope of reconciliation even more difficult. So, we're dealing with a situation that's, layered with historical baggage and rife with potential consequences. On one hand, you have Trump claiming this plan will bring stability, and that it has widespread support. But on the other hand, the sources are highlighting the very real potential for international condemnation, legal challenges, increased violence, damaged alliances, and a deepening of historical grievances.
It's a complex and volatile situation, to say the least. And to understand it better, we need to try to get inside Trump's head and figure out what's driving him to make such a bold and potentially disastrous move.
Right. Let's do that. Let's try to delve into the possible motivations behind Trump's proposal and see if we can make sense of this seemingly irrational gamble.
Okay, let's see. It's a puzzling move, even for someone like Trump, as unpredictable as he is, but maybe.
The key to understanding this, his motivation, lies in his need to secure a legacy.
Legacy. How so? Well, think about it. Trump's presidency, it's been anything but conventional.
Right.
He's faced impeachment, constant criticism, a deeply divided public, maybe. He sees this as a chance to make a big move, something that would cement his place in history.
So he's swinging for the fences, hoping to pull off something that overshadows all the controversy and kind of solidifies his image as a bold, decisive leader.
Exactly. And what better way to do that than to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, something that's eluded presidents for decades. I mean, if he could pull this off, it would be a legacy-defining achievement.
Wouldn't that require a level of diplomatic finesse and strategic thinking? Well, that hasn't exactly been Trump's strong suit from what we've seen so far. This plan seems more likely to ignite a firestorm than to bring about peace.
That's the gamble, right? And it's important to remember that Trump, he's always been a risk taker. He's made a career out of defying expectations, going against the grain.
True. He built his empire on bold moves and risky ventures. But this isn't a real estate deal or a reality TV show. The stakes are incredibly high. And the potential for disastrous consequences is very real.
Absolutely. And even if we give him the benefit of the doubt and assume he's doing this with the best of intentions, there's still the question of whether this plan is even remotely feasible.
That's what I keep coming back to. How do you even begin to relocate 2 million people? Where would they go? Who would pay for it? The logistics alone seem insurmountable.
You're right. The sources raise serious doubts about the practicality of this whole plan. Relocating 2 million people would be, a logistical nightmare. It would require immense resources and coordination. And then there's the issue of Palestinian resistance, which we've already talked about.
Right. Groups like Hamas, they're not just going to sit back and watch this happen. They'll see it as an existential threat and respond accordingly.
Exactly. They have a vested interest in maintaining control of Gaza. And they've shown they're willing to fight for it. They've built tunnels, stockpiled weapons, developed sophisticated tactics for urban warfare.
Yeah.
Taking control of Gaza, that would be just the beginning of a much larger and bloodier conflict.
Even if the U.S. military could successfully overcome that initial resistance and secure the territory, they'd then be faced with the task of pacifying a hostile population and governing a region that's been, well, a hotbed of conflict for decades.
It would be a recipe for a protracted and costly occupation, one that could easily drain American resources and entangle the U.S. in a quagmire with no clear exit strategy.
As the sources point out, it could also lead to a wider regional conflict, potentially drawing in other actors like Iran, who would be all too eager to exploit the chaos.
And an instability.
Exactly. And that's the real danger here. This plan has the potential to destabilize the entire region with consequences that could extend far beyond the immediate conflict. It seems like Trump is either incredibly naive about the complexities of this whole situation, or he's deliberately playing a very dangerous game, one that could have catastrophic repercussions.
It's hard to say what's going on in his mind. But one thing's clear. This situation has the potential to spiral out of control very quickly, with consequences that could reshape the geopolitical landscape of the entire Middle East.
It's a sobering thought, and it makes you wonder if there are any viable alternatives to this plan, any paths forward that don't involve such massive risks and potential for bloodshed.
Well, as we've discussed, many experts believe that a two-state solution with an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel is still the most viable option. It's been the cornerstone of peace negotiations for decades. And while it's faced numerous setbacks and challenges, it remains the most widely accepted framework for a lasting resolution.
Hasn't that been tried and failed repeatedly? What makes this time any different?
You're right. Achieving a two-state solution would require immense political will and compromise from both sides, something that's been sorely lacking in the past. However, the alternative, as we're seeing with Trump's proposal, could be far more disastrous.
So, what would a successful two-state solution actually entail? What are the key issues that need to be addressed?
There are a number of complex issues that would need to be negotiated, including the borders of the two states, the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and security arrangements for both Israelis and Palestinians. Each of these issues is fraught with historical baggage and deep-seated emotions, making compromise incredibly difficult.
Sounds like a monumental task, but surely there are people working towards this goal, trying to find a way forward that doesn't involve violence and displacement.
Absolutely. There are countless individuals and organizations, both Palestinian and Israeli, who are dedicated to finding a peaceful resolution. They're working tirelessly to build bridges, promote dialogue, and foster understanding between the two sides.
And what about the role of the international community? Can they play a constructive role in facilitating a peaceful resolution?
The international community has a crucial role to play. They can provide diplomatic support, mediate negotiations, and offer economic assistance to help build a viable Palestinian state. They can also hold both sides accountable for their actions and ensure that international law is respected.
And so, while Trump's proposal has thrown a wrench into the works and created a lot of uncertainty, there are still people working towards a more peaceful future. A future where Israelis and Palestinians can coexist without fear and violence.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that amidst all the chaos and uncertainty, there are still glimmers of hope. There are people on both sides who refuse to give up on the dream of peace.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure and strive for a better tomorrow.
And it's a reminder that ultimately the path to peace lies in dialogue, understanding, and a willingness to compromise.
Well said. So, as we wrap up our discussion on Trump's proposal and its potential consequences, let's shift gears and explore some of the alternatives, focusing on the two-state solution and the challenges it faces.
That's a crucial conversation to have, because while Trump's plan may grab headlines, it's important to remember that there are other paths forward, paths that offer hope for a more peaceful and just future.
Okay, so we've talked about Trump's proposal, potential consequences, explored some of his motivations, but let's get into this two-state solution you mentioned. What would it actually take to make that work?
Well, It's not a simple fix, that's for sure. It requires a real level of commitment and compromise from both sides, which honestly has been incredibly elusive over the years. I mean, we're talking about some incredibly sensitive issues. Like, to start, the borders of these two proposed
That's just like a logical starting point. Where do you even draw the line?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The borders of a future Palestinian state, they're incredibly contentious, with disputes over land ownership, settlements, access to resources. There would need to be a real willingness to negotiate a fair and viable solution, one that takes into account the needs and concerns of both Israelis and Palestinians.
Right. And then you have the issue of Jerusalem, a city sacred to both Jews and Muslims. How do you divide something like that? Something that holds such profound religious and cultural significance for both sides.
The status of Jerusalem, that's perhaps the most challenging and emotionally charged issue in this entire conflict. Both Israelis and Palestinians claim Jerusalem as their capital. And any agreement would have to find a way to address these competing claims while ensuring access to holy sites for all religions.
It sounds almost impossible. And we haven't even mentioned the right of return for Palestinian refugees, which has been a sticking point. In previous negotiations.
Yeah. The right of return, that's another incredibly complex issue and emotionally charged. Millions of Palestinians were displaced during the 1948 war and subsequent conflicts, and their descendants have long demanded the right to return to their ancestral homes. Israel, though, fears that allowing such a large influx of Palestinians would threaten its Jewish character. Finding a solution that addresses the legitimate concerns of both sides, it would require a tremendous amount of creativity and flexibility.
And there's ever-present issue of security.
Yeah.
Both Israelis and Palestinians have legitimate security concerns that need to be addressed in any peace agreement.
Absolutely. Israel has long struggled with terrorism and violence coming from Palestinian territories, while Palestinians, they face restrictions on their movement and freedom due to Israeli security measures. Any two-state solution would need to include really robust security arrangements that guarantee the safety and well-being of both populations.
So, we're talking about tackling some incredibly complex and sensitive issues, each one layered with years of mistrust, resentment, and violence. Is there any reason to believe that a two-state solution is even achievable at this point?
It's definitely a daunting task, and the current political climate, with leaders on both sides seeming more interested in consolidating power and making compromises, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
So what can be done?
We're
just doomed to repeat this cycle of violence and stalemate.
Indefinitely. I wouldn't say doomed, but it's clear that a new approach is needed, one that moves beyond the same old rhetoric and stale negotiating tactics. We need leaders who are willing to take risks for peace, who are willing to challenge the status quo and inspire their people to embrace a different future.
And what about the role of the international community? Can they do anything to break this deadlock?
Absolutely. The international community can play a vital role in supporting a peaceful resolution. They can provide financial assistance to help build a strong and viable Palestinian state, offer their expertise in mediating negotiations, and hold both sides accountable for upholding their commitments.
Well, I think our decade of the road is undoubtedly challenging. There are still glimmers of hope, people and organizations working tirelessly to find a way forward.
Exactly. There are peace activists on both sides risking their lives and reputations to build bridges and promote understanding. There are diplomats working behind the scenes to keep communication channels open and explore new avenues for negotiation. And there are ordinary citizens who refuse to give up on the dream of a shared future, where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace and security.
Their stories are a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope endures, and that ultimately it's through dialogue, understanding, and a willingness to compromise that we can break free from this cycle of violence and create a better future for all.
It's a reminder that peace is not a destination, but a journey. And it's a journey that requires patience, perseverance, and a belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Kind of a fascinating and thought-provoking conversation.
Indeed. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring this complex and important issue.
There's always more to learn, more to understand.
Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
We are here to make things clear